I stopped believing in magic long before the festival. The lanterns were beautiful anyway. That was the problem with beautiful things. They kept existing whether you believed in them or not. Joan said that was exactly why I needed to get out of the house. One dance, she said, her elbow finding my ribs with the precision of someone who had been doing it since we were 12. That is all I am asking. One dance, and then you are allowed to go home and be tragic. I had attended 5 moonlight festivals, gone home the same each time, alone, careful, somehow smaller than when I arrived, like the night had taken something from me I hadn't agreed to give. The music, the lanterns, the couples spinning beneath strings of gold light, all of it a reminder of the life that kept happening around me without ever quite including me. But tonight, something shifted in my chest. Something tired of being tired. The next man I see, I told myself, I will ask him to dance. Just that. Just once. Just proof that I still exist the way a woman is supposed to. I looked up and found him. He stood at the edge of the lantern light like he had grown there, tall, masked in dark silver, utterly still in a crowd that moved like water around him without knowing why. There was a quiet about him that felt chosen rather than accidental, the kind of quiet that had weight. The lantern light caught the silver of his mask and threw it back in fragments, beautiful and unreadable, and something in my chest pulled toward him the way a compass pulls north. Not because I decided to, because I had no say in the matter. I didn't know his name. I didn't know why my hands had gone cold, or why every step toward him felt like walking to the edge of something I couldn't see the bottom of. I only knew my feet were moving. He said yes. No hesitation, no polite reluctance, just a single nod and his hand extended toward mine like he had been expecting me, like I was not an interruption, but an arrival. That was the first thing that undid me. We moved together and the festival fell away. The music, the crowd, the smell of roasted spice and wood smoke, all of it blurred at the edges until there was only this. His hand steady at my waist, his eyes, dark and unreadable behind the mask, holding mine with an attention so complete it felt almost unbearable. Not the attention of a man deciding if I was worth his time. The attention of a man who had already decided and was simply not looking away. For 3 songs, I forgot the verdict I had made about myself. I forgot every man who had stayed just long enough to make leaving feel like my fault. I forgot the slow erosion, the quiet diminishing, the way I had learned to make myself smaller in rooms so no one would notice when I eventually disappeared from them. I forgot it all. And in its place was just this: a dance floor, a stranger, and the terrifying, simple feeling of being held by someone who was paying attention. For 3 songs, I was just a woman being held by someone who was paying attention. Then the music softened, and my courage, desperate, reckless, the last coin in an empty pocket, made its move. "One more thing," I said, and my voice only shook a little. "Just one. Could I stopped, started again. "Would you kiss me?" The words left my mouth and hung between us, naked and irretrievable. Something moved behind his eyes. Not disgust, not the flicker of a man calculating an exit. Something that looked devastatingly, almost like pain, like the question had cost him something he hadn't been prepared to pay, like he had seen something coming from a long distance and had braced for it, and it had hit him anyway. He was quiet for 1 breath, 2. Then he said, very softly, "No." I heard it in my bones. I thanked him. I kept my voice level. I smiled the way I had practiced smiling, the one that looked like dignity from the outside. I stepped back and let the crowd close between us like water over a stone, and I walked away from the lanterns and the music and the one moment all night that had felt real. The walk home was 20 minutes. It felt like a sentence being read aloud. Joan was at my door. She took one look at my face, just one, and she opened her arms without saying a word. She didn't ask what happened. She didn't tell me he wasn't worth it or that there would be others or any of the hollow things people say when they don't know what else to do. She just held on. And that was how I knew it was worse than I was pretending. Joan only went quiet when things were bad enough for words to feel like an insult. I lay awake long after she left, staring at the ceiling, replaying the moment he said no, trying to make it mean something other than what it meant, trying to find the version of the story where his eyes hadn't looked like pain, where they had looked like indifference, which would have been easier, cleaner, a door closed rather than one that seemed to open just enough for the cold to get in. I couldn't find it. What I found instead, in the dark, was this. He had looked at me like I was something rare, and he had still let me go. I closed my eyes. I did not yet know that 3 miles away, in a castle I had never entered, a man was standing at a window in the dark, still wearing his mask, with his hands pressed flat against the stone to stop them shaking. I did not yet know that he knew my name. I did not yet know that he had known it before I ever crossed the festival square. I did not yet know that letting me walk away had been the hardest thing he had ever done in his life, and that he had done it to save mine. All I knew in the dark was the verdict. I was not a woman men chose. I was a woman men endured. I was wrong. But it would take fire and loss and a prophecy written in blood older than either of us before I would finally believe it. I had almost convinced myself it hadn't happened. 3 days of market work, bread baking, Joan's running commentary on everything and nothing, 3 days of the ordinary world pressing the festival back into the category of things that didn't count, moments that happened in lantern light and dissolved my morning. I was good at that. Filing things under doesn't count was a skill I had been perfecting for years. I was reaching for a bundle of dried herbs when the air changed. I don't know how else to describe it. The market didn't go quiet. The vendors kept shouting, the children kept running, the world kept doing what the world does. But something in the air shifted. The way it shifts before a storm, when the pressure drops and every animal within a mile radius goes still without knowing why. The smell of the herb stalls, the shouts of vendors, the press of strangers, all of it continued exactly as before. And underneath all of it, something moved, like a current in deep water, like a note played too low for the ears but felt in the chest. I turned around. He was standing 6 feet away. No mask, no festival crowd to blur the edges of him, just a man in a dark coat with his hands loose at his sides, watching me with an expression so composed it should have been reassuring. It wasn't, because underneath the composure was something focused and absolute, and it was pointed entirely at me. He was more devastating without the mask. That felt deeply unfair. I opened my mouth to say something sharp, something that would rebuild the wall fast enough to matter, and he said my name. Nancy. Not excuse me, not we met at the festival. My name, spoken with a quietness that landed in my chest like a stone dropped into still water. Certain, unhurried, the way a man says a name he has been carrying for a while, carefully, in a room where no one else could hear, and is only now, finally, saying it out loud where it was always meant to land. The warmth I felt at that word was immediate and involuntary and made no sense at all. I went cold from my throat to my feet. How do you know my name? He didn't answer that. What he said instead was, "Can I buy you tea?" The audacity of it was so complete I almost laughed. This man, who had held me on a dance floor like I was worth holding, then refused my kiss and let me walk away destroyed, was standing in my market on a Tuesday morning asking about tea like we were old acquaintances settling a debt. "No," I said. He nodded, slowly, the way a man nods when he has heard something that confirms rather than disappoints. Like my refusal was a data point he had been expecting and had simply noted and filed away. like he was playing a longer game than the one I was looking at. Then he turned and walked away through the crowd, which parted for him without anyone seeming to notice it was doing so. I stood there, with my herbs and my hammering pulse, and watched him go. Joan materialized at my elbow so fast I suspected she had been hovering. "That man," she said, with the slow, deliberate delivery of someone choosing every word like a weapon, "looked at you like you were the answer to a question he has been asking for years. You're being dramatic. Nancy," she turned to face me fully, "I have been dramatic exactly twice in my life, and both times I was right. You are being blind." I told her I was fine. I told her it was nothing. I told her 3 different versions of "doesn't count," while she watched me with the expression she reserved for things she had already decided to be patient about. That night, I lay awake again. Ceiling, dark, the old, familiar company. But this time, it wasn't the refusal keeping me awake. It was his voice. Nancy. He had said it like he knew me, not like he had asked around the market, not like he had done the ordinary human work of finding out a stranger's name. He had said it like the name was already his, like he had been carrying it somewhere close for a long time and had only just had occasion to use it, like saying it out loud was not the beginning of knowing me, but the arrival of something that had already been true. I told myself it didn't matter. I told myself I was constructing a story out of nothing because I was lonely and a little broken, and the human mind will build a ladder out of 2 sticks if it wants to climb badly enough. I almost believed it, and then my eyes fell on my windsill, where a single white flower, one I had never bought, one that had not been there this morning, sat in a small glass of water like it had always belonged there. The petals caught the moonlight coming through the glass. Still, perfect, placed with the deliberateness of someone who had chosen the exact spot and taken their time about it. My door had been locked all day. I sat up slowly in the dark, heart hitting my ribs like a fist. He had been in my home. I told myself the flower had a rational explanation. I came up with 17 of them over the following 2 days, each one thinner than the last, each one collapsing under the weight of the single, undeniable fact. My door was locked, and something had been inside anyway, and it had left me something living and white and quietly deliberate on my windowsill, like a message written in a language I didn't yet speak. I didn't tell Joan. She would have either moved in permanently or marched through the town demanding answers, and I wasn't ready for either. He came back to the market the next morning, and the morning after that. Never for long, never pushing, just appearing at the edges of my day like a recurring note in a song I hadn't agreed to learn, browsing a stall nearby, standing at the end of a lane, present and unhurried, and watching me with that same composed, patient attention that made my skin feel 2 sizes too small. The answers came sideways, the way the worst truths always do. First, the ring, a crest I didn't recognize until I did, the wolf and the broken crown pressed into dark metal, the seal I had seen stamped on every royal decree posted in the town square since I was a child. Then the guards, 2 of them, lingering at the market entrance in plain clothes that weren't plain enough, straightening almost imperceptibly every time he passed, the involuntary deference of men trained to protect something they considered irreplaceable. Then the merchant, old Peter, who had never been frightened of anything in 30 years of trading, going the color of old ash when the man in the dark coat turned away from his stall, and whispering to the woman beside him in a voice that carried further than he intended. Alpha King. The world tilted. I stood in the middle of the market with the noise roaring around me and the ground rearranging itself beneath my feet, and I thought, with a clarity that was almost funny, the man I asked to kiss me at a public festival is the Alpha King. I found him at the edge of the square. He saw me coming, of course he did. He watched me cross the distance between us with that same unreadable composure, and when I stopped in front of him, close enough that I had to tip my chin up to meet his eyes, he said nothing, just waited. "You're the Alpha King," I said. "Yes." No hesitation, no apology, no performance of surprise at being caught. Something about that simple, undecorated yes cracked the careful lid I had been keeping on 5 days of confusion and sleepless ceilings and a flower I couldn't explain. And the anger came up fast and hot and absolute. "You came to my market and said my name, and you are the Alpha King, and you have been—" I stopped, lowered my voice, started again. "You left something in my home. My door was locked." "You were safe," he said. "You are safe. That is the only thing I can tell you right now." That is not even close to enough. I know. You don't get to just stand there and look at me like that and say, "I know." "Nancy." My name in his mouth again, same as the market, same as whatever dark room he had set it in before I ever gave it to him, certain, unhurried, like a hand pressed flat against a door to stop it slamming. "I know it isn't enough. I know I owe you more than I can give you yet. I'm asking you to trust that what I am withholding is the only thing standing between you and something I cannot let reach you." I stared at him. He didn't flinch, didn't qualify, didn't look away. That was what broke me, not the words, but the stillness, the absolute refusal to perform innocence or ask for grace he hadn't earned. He simply stood there and let me be furious at him and held his ground like a man who had decided the storm was worth weathering. It was the most disarming thing he had done yet. I left. I walked away fast, heart hammering, hand shaking, and I did not look back, because I knew if I looked back he would still be watching, and I had no defenses left for that. Joan was at the stall when I returned. She took one look at my face. "Tell me," she said. I told her. She went silent, completely, utterly silent, which, from Joan, was the conversational equivalent of a natural disaster. I counted the seconds. 1, 2, 5, 8, 10. Then, "Nancy," very careful, very deliberate, "you asked the Alpha King to kiss you at a public festival in front of everyone." "Joan, I have never," she pressed one hand to her chest, like she was keeping something inside it, "been more proud of you in my entire life. This is not— You walked up to the most powerful man in the kingdom and asked him to kiss you," her voice was climbing, "with your whole chest at a festival. He said no. He came back, Nancy." The laughter drained from her voice as fast as it had risen, replaced with something serious and low and certain. She gripped my arm. "Men who are not interested do not come back. Men who are not interested do not know your name before you give it to them. Men who are not interested do not leave flowers in locked rooms." She held my gaze. "Whatever he is not telling you, and I agree he needs to tell you, that man is not indifferent. That man is terrified of something, and whatever it is—" She stopped. Her eyes moved to a point past my shoulder. The color left her face. I turned. 2 men I had never seen before stood at the entrance to the market lane. Not guards, no uniforms, just 2 men watching me with the flat professional stillness of people who had been paid to be somewhere and were in no hurry to leave. They weren't looking at the stalls. They were looking at me. And when my eyes met theirs, neither of them looked away. The room Voss used when he visited the border territories was not comfortable by design. Stone floor, 1 window, a table scarred by decades of men making decisions they would later regret. He preferred it this way. Comfort made men slow. Voss had not survived 40 years of his cousin's expanding influence by being slow. He stood at the window and watched the market square below. Specifically, he watched the woman at the herb stall who had no idea she was being watched, and the way the Alpha King's plainclothes guards kept adjusting their positions around her perimeter, like a tide responding to a moon. Interesting. His man Darrow appeared in the doorway. "Confirmed," he said. The merchant's account. 3 dances, a request, a refusal. He left on foot, alone. She went home crying. Not crying, Voss said. She went home wounded. There's a difference. He turned from the window. Crying means it's over. Wounded means it's still open. Darrow waited. He had learned, over years of service, that Voss's silences were not empty. He refused her in public, at a festival, in front of witnesses, and then he went back. He moved to the table, running one finger along its scarred edge. He doesn't go back for nothing. He has never gone back for anything. He looked up. Do you understand what that means? The bond, Darrow said carefully. The bond, Voss sat. 40 years. My father watched his father sign that treaty with the full knowledge that the one clause that could dissolve it was a king finding his mate. He folded his hands on the table. My father called it a flaw. I have always called it a door. He was quiet for a moment. The question was never whether the bond would come. The question was always whether I would be watching when it did. And the woman? Darrow asked. If she's his mate, she is nobody. Not cruelly, with the flat precision of someone describing a fact. A market woman from a village that doesn't appear on military maps. No pack, no title, no protection. Alone. He paused. Which means she is the perfect lever. Darrow shifted. And if he claims her before we move? Voss looked at him with the patient expression of a man who had considered every angle of a problem so many times it had become a kind of boredom. That is exactly what I want him to do, he said. I don't want the treaty. I don't want the throne. Not yet. Not this way. He rose and moved back to the window, watching the woman below reach for a bundle of sage with complete unawareness that her life had just become a political instrument. He watched her. I want them to see their king choose a market woman over their peace. I want the border packs furious. I want the council fractured. A pause. And then, when he is scrambling to hold what's left together, that is when I move for the throne. Not against a king the kingdom has already decided to doubt. Darrow was quiet. She's the fuse, he said finally. She's the fuse, Voss agreed. Below, the woman looked up suddenly, scanning the square with the instinct of someone who felt watched without knowing why. Her eyes moved across rooftops and lanes and found nothing. Voss stepped back from the window. Find out everything about her. Her patterns, her route, her friend, the loud one. He straightened his coat. And find me a room. Stone floor, cold. Somewhere she will have nothing to do but think. He moved toward the door. Fear is useful, but a woman alone with her own doubts is something far more effective. He paused at the threshold. He'll come for her, of course. That was never the question. A thin smile. The question is what it costs him when he does. He picked up his coat from the chair by the door, unhurried, a man with all the time in the world. He glanced once more at the window, at the woman who had no idea she was already in the middle of a story that started long before she walked up to a masked stranger and asked him to dance. Begin the second phase, quietly. I want nothing that can be traced back before the treaty falls. His voice dropped to something almost gentle. We are not in a hurry. We have never been in a hurry. The throne has been waiting 40 years. It can wait a little longer. Darrow nodded and left. Voss stood alone in the room for a moment longer, looking at the market below, at the woman who had just, without knowing it, set the final mechanism in motion. Then he turned away from the window. He did not look back. Men who were certain of outcomes rarely did. He found me before I found him. I was still staring at the two men at the market entrance, heart suspended, Joan's hand tight on my arm, when a figure stepped out of the side lane and placed himself between us and them without a word. Dark coat, familiar stillness, the crowd adjusting around him like water finding a new course. Eric. He didn't look at me. He looked at them, and whatever they saw in his face made both men take a single step back before they turned and disappeared into the crowd like smoke and wind. The whole thing lasted 4 seconds. He turned to me then, and his expression was no longer composed. Underneath the control was something tight and urgent and almost afraid. Not for himself. That was the part that stopped my breath. The fear on his face was shaped entirely around me. 1 hour, he said quietly. Give me 1 hour and I will tell you everything." Joan's grip on my arm tightened. I felt her ready to speak, ready to insert herself between us with the fierce maternal efficiency she deployed whenever she felt I was about to do something that would cost me. "Nancy," he said. Just that. Just my name, in that voice that still landed in my chest like something finding the place it belonged. I looked at Joan. Her eyes were wide and worried and certain all at once. 1 hour, I told him. He took me to a room I had never seen, small, stone-walled, tucked inside the castle's eastern wing like a secret the building had been keeping. No court, no guards inside the door, a fire, 2 chairs, and the particular silence of a place where important things had been said before, and the walls had learned to hold them. He didn't sit. He stood by the window with his back half turned and his hands clasped behind him, and I understood instinctively that whatever he was about to say had been rehearsed and had still not gotten easier. "When you took my hand at the festival, something happened that I had been told to expect and had stopped believing in." I waited. "The mate bond." He turned to face me. "It ignited the moment you touched me, like a door blown open by a wind that had been building for years." A pause. "You are my fated mate, Nancy. The moon wrote your name against mine before either of us existed in the world." The fire crackled. I heard my own breathing. "That's why you said no," I said slowly. Not a question, a piece clicking into place with the soft, terrible finality of a lock turning. "There is a prophecy," he said, "older than my crown, older than the Northern Treaty. It binds every alpha king who finds his mate. If he claims her before she has spent 3 days inside Pack borders, the Northern Treaty dissolves by morning." "What is the Northern Treaty?" He looked at me steadily. 40 years of peace between 3 rival packs, thousands of families living in border territories who have never known war because that agreement holds. He paused. 1 kiss at a crowded festival, 1 public claim, and it dissolves. By the time the sun rose, you would have been the reason 3 packs went to war. Hundreds of people who have never heard your name would have paid for the 30 seconds it would have taken me to close the distance between us. The room was very quiet. I sat with it, all of it, the full, impossible weight of a secret he had been carrying since the moment I walked up to him with my borrowed smile and my last desperate dare. He had not found me undesirable. He had found me worth more than a treaty, and then chosen, in the space of a single breath, to protect us both, to protect everyone, to let me walk away destroyed rather than let me walk away unknowingly responsible for a war. "You knew all of that in the moment while we were dancing?" "Yes." "And you still said no?" "It was the hardest thing I have ever done." His voice was rough at the edges, the composure finally showing its cost. "I walked away, and I stood in that crowd, and I held myself still, and I have not—" He stopped. "I have not stopped thinking about it since." Something cracked open in my chest, wide and aching and completely without warning. Because this was not the story I had told myself in the dark. This was not indifference or endurance, or a man deciding I wasn't worth the effort. This was a man who recognized me as his in the space of a heartbeat and loved every life in his kingdom enough to let me go anyway. Then he did something that made me go still. He extended his hand toward mine, slowly, giving me every opportunity to pull back. And when my fingers met his, I felt it, a warmth that was not body heat, something underneath the skin moving along the join of our hands like light through water. Faint at first, almost imperceptible, and then stronger, a steady, certain pulse moving between our palms like something that had been waiting a long time for exactly this. He felt it too. I saw it in the slight tension around his eyes, the way he exhaled once, carefully, like a man who just confirmed something he had been afraid to hope for. "That," he said quietly, "is what I have been carrying since the festival." I stared at our joined hands, at the place where something invisible and absolute lived between our palms. "It will get stronger," he said. "The longer we are near each other, the more—" The door burst open. Lord Fenwick, white-faced and breathing hard, gripping the doorframe like the building was moving. They've been seen. Voss's men, 3 of them, inside the town borders. Eric was on his feet before the sentence finished. Every trace of the unguarded man who had just told me the hardest truth of his life locked away in an instant, replaced by something cold and absolute and dangerous. He turned to me. One look, fast, fierce, a whole conversation compressed in 2 seconds. "You cannot go home tonight." "What?" "Nancy." His voice left no room. "They were not watching the border. They were watching the market." His jaw tightened. "They were watching you." They gave me a room in the castle's west wing. Joan was brought in by nightfall. I had refused to discuss the alternative, and she arrived with a bag packed so efficiently it suggested she had been ready for exactly this emergency for some time. She took one look at the room, one look at the 2 guards outside the door, and said with great dignity, "I want it noted that I was right." I didn't sleep. The castle hummed around me in the dark. Distant footsteps, the low exchange of guards changing posts, the sound of wind finding gaps in stone that had been standing for centuries. A living place, a place with a heartbeat. Somewhere inside it, Eric was awake. I knew it the way I was beginning to know too many things about him, not through reason, but through something quieter and more animal that had been calibrating itself to him since the moment he took my hand on a festival floor. The days that followed did not feel like safety. They felt like a held breath. Voss's men had retreated to the border. Eric's guards had confirmed it, tracking them to the tree line and no further. "A warning," Lord Fenwick said grimly at the morning briefing I was not technically invited to and attended anyway. "A demonstration of reach. We know where she is. We know what she means to you. The clock is running." Eric said nothing during the briefing. He listened, asked 3 precise questions, and dismissed everyone with the flat efficiency of a man who had been making impossible decisions so long he had stopped flinching at them. But afterward, in the corridor, he paused beside me. "You shouldn't be in these meetings," he said. "And yet," I said. Something moved at the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile, the ghost of one, which I was beginning to understand was its own language. That was how it started, in the margins of crisis, in the corridor moments, in the doorway pauses, in the spaces between the urgent and the unbearable, where 2 people have nothing to do but notice each other. I began to see the man inside the king, the exhaustion he carried that no title could lift, the particular weight of someone who had been responsible for too much for too long and had simply learned to stand straighter under it rather than put it down, the dry, quiet humor that surfaced only when no one official was watching, a single understated line delivered to the ceiling that made Lord Fenwick pretend he hadn't heard it and made me press my lips together to keep from laughing out loud. The way he talked about his people, not the pacts or the territories or any of the abstractions men in power use to discuss lives they've never touched. He talked about specific people, the border families who had built their homes in the neutral zones because they trusted the treaty to hold, the children in the eastern villages who had never seen a war and didn't know to be afraid of one. He knew their names. He had been paying attention for years in the quiet, persistent way of someone who understood that power without witness was just cruelty wearing a better coat. That was the piece that undid me most. One evening, in the small study where we had fallen into the habit of ending up, I asked him why. "Why what?" he said. "Why you know their names, the border families, the eastern villages. Most kings know territories. You know people." He was quiet for a moment. The fire settled in the grate. Outside, the wind moved through the castle's upper passages in the low, persistent way it always did at this hour, like the building breathing. "When I was 19, he said, there was a border skirmish. Minor by the standards of what comes before and after. 3 villages caught between 2 pack disputes that had nothing to do with them." He looked at his hands. "I was with the patrol that arrived afterward. I had never seen what happens to ordinary people when powerful ones fail to manage their anger in time." He paused. "There was a family. The father had barricaded the door with a table. It hadn't helped. I stood in that house, and I made myself look at every room because I thought if I looked away, I would spend the rest of my reign making decisions from a distance, and distance is how that kind of thing happens in the first place. The study was very still. I went home and I learned every name I could find, he said. Every village, every pack leader 3 levels below the ones who sat at official tables. I have been doing it since. He finally looked up. Not because it changes what already happened, because it is the only honest response I have ever found to the question of what power is actually for. I sat with that for a long time. Your father, I said carefully. Did he... No. The word came out clean and final, the way a door closes on a room someone has decided to stop entering. Then, after a moment, quieter. My father believed the people existed to serve the kingdom. I have spent my entire reign trying to understand how to believe the opposite. He looked at the fire. He died before I could show him the difference. I am not certain he would have seen it regardless. There was no bitterness in his voice, something flatter and older than bitterness, the particular grief of a man who had stopped waiting for a thing that was never going to arrive. I'm sorry, I said. Don't be. A faint, genuine smile. He made me angry enough to be better. There is a kind of inheritance in that. He glanced at me sideways. You are the first person I have told that to who didn't immediately try to console me out of it. You don't need consoling out of it. It's true. He looked at me for a moment with that expression, the one that appeared when I said something he hadn't expected and wasn't certain what to do with. No, he said finally. It is. He saw me, too. I felt it happening and couldn't stop it. The way his attention moved over the things I thought I was hiding, the sharpness I deployed when I felt cornered, the way I deflected with humor when something landed too close, the loyalty I kept extending to people who hadn't earned it because some stubborn part of me still believed that if I was generous enough, patient enough, someone would eventually stay. You do that, he said another evening, not long after. Do what? Give people more grace than they've built toward, like you're trying to love them into becoming what you need them to be. The accuracy of it was so precise and so unwelcome that I said nothing for a full 10 seconds. That's an uncomfortable thing to notice about a person, I said finally. I notice things, he said simply. Occupational habit. Then, one evening, he reached for the same book I was reaching for on the study shelf, and our hands met, and the warmth was back, less faint this time, warmer, more present, like an ember that had been breathing steadily and had finally caught. We both went still. I looked at our overlapping hands on the spine of the book, at the faint trace of something luminous moving just beneath the skin at the point of contact, there for 2 seconds, then gone, like light seen from the corner of an eye. It's getting stronger, I said. Yes, he said. He did not move his hand. Neither did I. Joan watched all of it from a careful distance. She had appointed herself a kind of roving presence in the castle, charming the kitchen staff, befriending the younger guards, appearing in doorways at intervals with tea she distributed like a woman who had decided hospitality was her personal contribution to geopolitical stability. She reported back to no one, but her expression when she watched Eric and me talk said everything her mouth was, with tremendous restraint, not saying. We circled the bond, like a fire neither of us was ready to stand close to. He found reasons to say my name, small reasons, unnecessary reasons, reasons that existed only because saying it seemed to be something he had decided he was allowed to do now. I found the long way past his study every evening without examining why. The castle began to feel like somewhere I might know by heart. That terrified me more than Voss's men at the border. Because Voss I could see coming. This, the slow, sure gravity of a man who said my name like it was something he had been keeping safe, this arrived without warning and left no margin for the careful, managed retreat I had spent years perfecting. I was standing at the window of my room on the 5th night when Joan appeared in the doorway behind me. I didn't turn around. Don't, I said. You have a face. It's very loud. She was quiet for a moment. Then, gently, Nancy, when is the last time someone made you feel like the most important thing in the room without you having to earn it first? I didn't answer. I didn't have to. She crossed the room and stood beside me at the window. We watched the torches move in silence. Below us, in the courtyard, the night guard was changing. Boots on stone, low voices, the ordinary machinery of a place that never fully slept. And then one of the guards below broke formation, just slightly, just enough, turning his head toward the eastern gate with the particular alertness of a man who had heard something that wasn't meant to be heard. 3 seconds later, the bell began to ring. Not the hour bell, not the watch bell, the alarm. Joan grabbed my arm. Behind us, boots were already hammering down the corridor, fast, urgent, the sound of people running towards something rather than away from it. My door crashed open, one of Eric's guards, breathing hard. "My lady," his eyes were wide. "Lord Fenwick requests your immediate—" "What's happening?" I demanded. He hesitated for exactly 1 second. "Voss's men are not at the border anymore." "Where are they?" He looked at me with the expression of a man delivering a sentence he wished belonged to someone else. "They're inside the walls, and they're asking for you by name." Voss's men were removed from the castle walls by dawn. Not violent, there was no violence, which Eric had apparently decided through sheer force of will and 2 weeks of preemptive diplomacy. But the removal had the quality of a warning delivered and received. They went without resistance, which was somehow more unsettling than if they had fought. Men who left without fighting were men who had already gotten what they came for. I was not told the specifics. I stayed inside the castle walls because the alternative was walking directly into whatever Voss was building, and I had enough self-preservation to recognize a perimeter when I was inside one. But the castle felt smaller after that night. The corridors I had been learning by heart now had a different quality. Less shelter, more container. The guards outside my door stopped feeling like courtesy and started feeling like confirmation that the danger was real and close and had my name in its mouth. Joan didn't sleep. She sat in the chair by my door with her arms folded and her jaw set, and the expression of a woman daring the universe to try something. I loved her so much, it hurt. Eric found me on the 3rd evening after the breach, in the small courtyard off the west wing where I had taken to sitting when the walls pressed too close. He didn't announce himself. He simply appeared at the courtyard entrance, read the situation, me on the stone bench staring at nothing, and sat down beside me without asking if I wanted company. The fire in the iron brazier threw orange light across the stone. Somewhere above us, the night existed in complete indifference to the people tangled up inside it. "Tell me why you really came to the festival," he said. The real question, asked quietly, like he had been waiting for the right moment to set it down between us. So I told him. Not the version I had given Joan, the real one. There was a man named Daniel. I had not said his name out loud in 2 years. We had been together for 11 months, long enough that I had started using we without thinking, long enough that I had introduced him to Joan and watched her try to like him for my sake. He was not cruel. That was the thing I had spent the most time trying to explain to myself afterward, because cruelty would have been simpler. He was simply a man who had decided quietly and without announcement that I was a pleasant place to be until something better came along. I found out on a Wednesday. Not through confrontation or confession, through the particular silence of a phone not answered and a door not opened, and the slow cellular understanding that the person on the other side had simply stopped. No explanation, no argument, no ending I could point to and say, there, that is where it broke. Just absence spreading like a stain, until one morning I understood that he had been gone for 3 weeks, and I'd not noticed I hadn't followed. I stood in my kitchen, I told Eric, and I thought, I was not worth a conversation. I looked at the brazier, and the worst part was I wasn't even surprised. I was hurt, but underneath the hurt was recognition, like something I had been quietly expecting had finally arrived. Eric was very still beside me. After that, I stopped expecting anything different. I told myself I was being realistic, that some people were simply not built to be chosen permanently, and I was one of them. I laughed once, without humor. And then Joan dragged me to a festival, and I made myself a dare, and you said yes, and I forgot for 3 songs that I had ever decided any of that. I know what you told me about the bond. I believe you, but there is a part of me still standing at the edge of that dance floor, convinced the simpler explanation is true, that all of it is a beautiful story built around the same ending I always get. He turned to face me. He was quiet for a moment. Not the silence of a man reaching for the right diplomatic words, the silence of a man who was angry. Not at me, I understood that immediately, but on my behalf. Something tight in his jaw, something careful in the way he held himself, like he was deciding how much of what he felt to let into his voice. Daniel left without a conversation because he was a man who could not be bothered to treat you with basic honesty, he said. His voice was level, but underneath the level was something with heat in it. That is information about Daniel. It has never been information about you. His jaw tightened. You were not worth less than a conversation. You were worth more than he knew how to value. Those are entirely different things, and I need you to understand the difference. He held my gaze. You walked up to the most guarded man in this kingdom, asked him to dance, and rewrote his entire future before you knew his name. His voice dropped, quieter now, and somehow more certain because of it. The woman who did that has never once been the problem. She has always been the point. The courtyard was very quiet. I had no answer. The verdict I had carried for years opened its mouth to speak and found nothing that could survive the specific weight of that question. Not because he had flattered me out of it, because he had named it so precisely, had seen it so clearly and refused it so completely that for the first time it felt less like truth and more like a story someone else had written about me and I had simply agreed to carry. I was still sitting with that when his head turned sharply toward the courtyard entrance. Every line of his body changed in an instant. His hand came up, the reflex of a man placing himself between a threat and something he was not going to allow to be reached. Lord Fenwick appeared in the doorway, face the color of old ash. A message came, from Voss. He looked at me, then at Eric. He doesn't want the treaty. He doesn't want the throne. A pause waited with dread. He wants her. He says if she is delivered to the border by sunrise, he will consider the Northern Treaty renewed for another 40 years. The courtyard went absolutely silent. Eric's voice, when it came, was so quiet it was somehow more frightening than shouting. "Get out," he said to Fenwick. "Your Majesty, the council is already—" "Get out." Fenwick left. Eric turned to me, and the look on his face was something I had never seen there before. Something rawer than composure, fiercer than control. A man standing at the edge of a choice that was going to cost him everything, no matter which way he fell. "Nancy," he said, and the way he said my name this time was not certain or unhurried or practiced. It was desperate. Eric did not deliver me to the border. I knew he wouldn't. Voss had never expected him to. The message wasn't an offer, but an opening move, a way of forcing Eric's hand into the open so everyone could see which way it fell. The council convened at midnight. I was not invited. Joan sat outside the chamber doors with her arms folded, and when a junior advisor suggested she might be more comfortable elsewhere, she looked at him with such complete stillness that he decided he had somewhere else to be. She told me this afterward. I was not there to witness it because at the precise hour the council was arguing about my fate, 3 floors above, I was in the market. I know how it sounds. Eric had restricted my movement to the castle grounds. I had agreed, genuinely, because I was not reckless. But Joan had needed specific herbs from the far stall, and I had told myself it was 20 minutes, I knew the route, the guards were at every entrance, and political men gave warnings before they— The hand that closed around my arm came from the left. Not rough, That was the part that frightened me most. Practiced and firm and without drama. The grip of someone who had done this before and understood that spectacle was a liability. The man beside me was unremarkable in every way. Plain coat, average height, a face designed to be forgotten. "Don't," he said quietly, "and this stays simple." Two more behind me. The crowd moved around us, oblivious, the market doing what markets do, loud and alive and completely indifferent to the woman being walked toward the eastern lane between three men who knew exactly where they were going. I went with them, not because I was not afraid, because I was afraid and thinking anyway, which turned out to be a different thing entirely. The room was stone and cold. A chair, a window set too high to see from, a door that locked with the sound of something heavy and final. Then silence. I sat in it for what felt like a long time. And then something happened that I had not expected. I got angry. Not the panicked, spiraling kind, the clean kind. The kind that arrives after fear burns through its first layer and leaves something harder underneath. A bright, furious clarity that started in my chest and moved outward until my hands stopped shaking. I had spent years making myself smaller, quieter, less, filed down every edge, softened every want, taken up exactly as much space as I was given and never asked for more. I had done it with the genuine belief that smallness was protection, that if I needed less, I could be hurt less. And I was sitting in a locked room anyway. Small hadn't saved me. Invisible hadn't saved me. The careful, managed retreat I had been perfecting since Daniel left without a conversation had not put a single inch of real distance between me and this cold stone floor. I pressed my back against the wall. I thought about a festival square, a dare made to myself because I had nothing left to lose. A woman who had walked up to the most powerful man in the kingdom with a borrowed smile and asked him to dance. I needed her back. I am worth this. The words arrived rough and more honest than anything I had said in years. I was always worth this. I am going to act like it. I stood up. I looked at the door. I started looking for anything in that room that could be useful. The chair, the hinges, the high window's stone ledge. Because if Eric was coming and some bone-deep certainty told me he was already moving, then I was not going to be found sitting down. At the castle gates, Joan had arrived 7 minutes after I didn't come back. She planted herself at the entrance with her market bag still over one arm and looked at the guard on duty with the expression of a woman who had suspended every social grace she possessed until further notice. "I don't care," she said before he could speak, "what title you hold or what your orders are. That is my best friend, and your king left a festival 3 weeks ago a completely different man because of her." One step forward. "So you are going to get him, right now, or I am going to stand here and get louder until someone does." The guard looked at her. He got Eric. I heard him before the door opened. That was the part that I had not expected, the part no one had told me about the bond, or perhaps the part that could not be told, only felt. From somewhere outside the locked room, moving closer through stone and distance, I heard his voice. Not words, not shouting, something lower than words, something that moves through the walls the way a deep note moves through a floor, felt before it is heard, arriving in the chest before it reaches the ears. He said my name, and the bond answered. It rose in my chest like a bell struck after years in storage, not a tremor, not a suggestion, but a full, ringing resonance that moved through every part of me and kept moving, certain and unhurried and entirely without apology. Something in me recognized something in him through 40 feet of stone wall, and the recognition was so complete and so absolute that for 3 seconds I forgot to be afraid. I pressed my hand flat against the door. On the other side, I felt the moment he reached it. Then, it came off its hinges. Not kicked, removed, with the flat, efficient force of someone who had decided that obstacles between him and what he was looking for were temporary conditions to be corrected. Eric stepped through the frame, and the cold room contracted around his presence the way rooms did, the way crowds did, the way every space he entered rearranged itself around the fact of him. He looked at Voss first. One look, comprehensive, final, the inventory of a man who had decided on the outcome and was simply confirming the details. Then he looked at me. Everything else stopped. He crossed the room in 4 strides, and his hands came up to my face. Not careful, not restrained, not the measured touch of a man managing distance. Just his hands, framing my face, his eyes moving over me with an urgency that had nothing composed about it. "Are you hurt?" "No." He exhaled once, the sound of someone releasing something held at considerable cost. Then he turned back to Voss. "I want witnesses," Voss said. His composure had reassembled itself, thin, functional, the armor of a man repositioning after a lost opening. "Then witness it." Eric's voice filled the room. Not loud, something underneath loud. The resonance of something ancient invoked by a man who had made his decision between one heartbeat and the next and was done with intermediate steps. He turned to me and took both my hands, and the bond came alive between our palms, like a current finding a completed circuit, warm, blazing, the feeling of a door blown open that had been sealed for years. Nancy. Not a performance, not a declaration for the audience of Voss and his men and the guards crowding the doorway. Just my name, said with the totality of a man who had carried it longer than I knew. "You are mine. I am yours. The moon wrote it, and I am done pretending otherwise." The silver light came from our joined hands. Not a surprise, not entirely. I had felt its first breath in a quiet room when our fingers met over a truth he was afraid to speak. I had felt it again on a bookshelf in the dark, 2 seconds of luminescence at the point where our hands overlapped, there and gone like a match struck in a closed room. I had been carrying the memory of it, since the knowledge that something was building, that the warmth was not metaphor, but matter, that the bond had been announcing itself in careful increments, like a tide before anyone thought to check the shore. And I had pressed my hand against a locked door and felt him on the other side, and the bond had answered before the door could. Now it arrived in full. It moved up our wrists and wound around our arms in coiling threads, absolute and unhurried, visible and undeniable, and thoroughly uninterested in the political consequences of its own existence. It filled the cold room with the quality of moonlight through clear water, and every man in the doorway went still. Voss stared at our joined hands, at the light that declared itself with the certainty of something that had always been true and was only now being seen. "The treaty," he said, quieter, the pleasantness entirely gone. "Dissolves by morning, yes, I know. You know what that means. I know exactly what it means. No waver. I also know what it means to leave her in a locked room while I protect a treaty by pretending she is worth less than the paper it was written on." A pause. "I chose at the festival. I chose tonight. The difference is I am done choosing quietly." Voss looked at him, then at me, then at the light that wound between us like something that had been waiting to be seen. Whatever calculation he ran behind those careful eyes, it arrived somewhere different than he had planned. Not defeat. Voss was not a man who experienced defeat, only revised timelines, but the recognition of a foundation removed. The strategy built on breaking Eric open publicly assumed Eric would hesitate, that he would weigh and calculate and choose the treaty, or choose her, and either way be seen to be diminished. He had not calculated for a man who chose without hesitating and looked like he had been waiting to. Voss straightened his coat, a small, precise gesture, the movement of a man who had just quietly closed one door and was already thinking about the next. "You've bought yourself a crisis," he said. "The border packs will not be patient. They will be heard, every one of them, at a table I am building for exactly that purpose. Tables, Voss said, almost to himself, a thin sound that wasn't quite a smile. He turned and walked toward the door. His men fell in behind him with the smooth efficiency of people who had rehearsed a retreat as carefully as advance. At the threshold, he paused. He did not look at Eric. He looked at me. "You changed the board," he said, simply, without rancor, the observation of a man updating a model. "I will remember that." He left. The silence he left behind was different from the silence before he arrived. The cold was still there, the stone floor, the high window, the locked door now standing open, but something had shifted in the quality of the air, the way air shifts after a storm has committed, when the worst of the pressure has broken and what remains is simply weather. I became aware, slowly, that my hands were shaking, not from fear, from the aftermath of being afraid and thinking through it anyway, which apparently cost something on the way out that it hadn't on the way in. Eric felt it. He looked down at our joined hands, still faintly luminous, the silver threads fading now like embers cooling, and without a word he closed both his hands around mine. Steady, warm, the grip of a man who had decided that whatever happened next, he was not letting go. "You were standing when I came in," he said quietly. "I told you I would be. You did." Something in his voice that wasn't quite steadiness and wasn't quite wonder, but lived in the territory between them. "You did tell me that." The Northern Treaty dissolved by morning, exactly as the prophecy had written it would. The news moved through the kingdom like a weather front, fast, total, changing the temperature of everything it touched. Border pack leaders demanded immediate counsel, lords sent letters of protest, envoys arrived with the careful neutrality of people whose safety had been built on an agreement that no longer existed. What came next was the table. Eric set it up in the great council chamber, round, deliberately, no head and no foot. He invited every pack leader, every border representative, every lord whose people lived in the affected territories. He invited me to sit beside him, not behind him, not as an observer, but with parchment and ink and an equal vote on procedure. Lord Fenwick set 2 cups of water at that seat without comment. The negotiations were hard and fast and honest, the way things are when everyone in the room understands that the alternative to agreement is something none of them want to explain to their grandchildren. I found that the skills I had built in a market stall translated, hearing what someone was actually saying underneath what they were performing, knowing when silence was more useful than words, distinguishing between a grievance that was a real wound and one that was a negotiating position. On the 4th day, Grevin, the most skeptical voice at the table, produced a folded letter from his coat, old, travel-worn, the seal already broken. "My grandmother lived in the Eastern Neutral Zone," he said. "She told me when I was first elected that the treaty was the only reason her house still stood. She also told me it had never once included anyone like her in the room where it was written." He raised his eyes to mine. "You're the first person at this table who has said what she said." He sat back down. But the momentum almost broke on day 6. Aldenmore, older than Grevin, harder, the kind of man who survived by being the last one willing to walk away, rose without warning and said the new terms addressed the Renvale Pass in 2 lines. 2 lines for 40 years of guaranteed safety. He gathered his papers. 3 northern lords moved to follow him. The room understood what that meant. Aldenmore leaving fractured the agreement before it was signed, exactly the kind of incomplete piece Voss could spend the next decade widening. Lord Fenwick's face went carefully blank. I looked at the 2 lines about Renvale, then at Aldenmore's back. The pass at Renvale connects 6 villages to the eastern market road. In winter, when the pass closes, those villages don't trade. They don't receive medical supplies. They wait. I kept my voice level. 2 lines isn't a slight, it's a drafting error. Give me 20 minutes to correct it before you leave. Aldenmore turned. He looked at me the way people look at something they hadn't expected to be offering anything useful. Then he looked at Eric, who said nothing, who simply sat back in his chair with the deliberate patience of a man who had brought someone to this table because he trusted what she would do at it. That look cost Aldenmore something. I watched it land. 20 minutes, he said. It took 45, but he signed. And when he did, the 3 lords behind him sat back down. The new treaty took 3 weeks. It was longer than the old one, less elegant, more honest, built on terms that named the people it protected specifically, with provisions the old treaty had never considered and guarantees it had never bothered to make. The Renvale Pass got 4 pages. Grevin signed first. Joan attended the signing in deep autumn colors, her silver combs in her hair, standing at the back of the chamber with her hands pressed over her mouth. When Nancy's witness signature went onto the parchment, Eric's insistence, a permanent record of who had sat at the table, Joan cried without apologizing. I would not have expected anything else. That evening, Eric found me in the castle garden, where someone had planted roses against the stone wall decades ago, and they had continued existing with the stubborn, gorgeous persistence of things that didn't require permission. He sat beside me on the stone bench, and we were quiet together in the way we had learned to be, the specific ease of 2 people who had stopped performing for each other a long time ago. "I want to tell you something," he said. "Then tell me." "I searched for you." He looked at the roses. "For years, not knowing your face or your name, just knowing the bond was written somewhere. I kept going to places where people gathered, festivals, markets, border fairs, anywhere that felt like the kind of place where someone might be." He turned to look at me. "And you walked up to me, in the dark, at the edge of the lanterns with your borrowed smile and your last brave dare, and you asked me to dance before I had given you a single reason to." Something warm and unguarded moved across his face, the look I had come to think of as the one he gave only when no one official was watching, and which I had apparently become one of the people for whom official did not apply. "I would have waited forever. You saved us both the time." The garden held its breath. I laughed. It came up from somewhere deep and real and entirely without the careful management I had been applying to my own emotions for so long I had almost forgotten what unmanaged felt like. Full and warm and a little wet at the edges, ringing off the stone walls and scattering into the evening air, and sounding, to my own ears, like something that had been locked for a very long time and had finally, at great cost and great grace, come open. Eric watched it with the expression of a man who had just confirmed something he had suspected and was profoundly satisfied to be right. "I went to that festival to dare myself back to life. I had not known I was walking straight toward the man who had been looking for me, and that loving you would cost us both something real and be worth every single piece of it," I said. He brought my hand to his lips. Above us, the first stars were appearing, indifferent and ancient and very beautiful, doing what stars do, existing whether you believed in them or not. I believed in them now. Across the kingdom, in a border room with a stone floor and a scarred table, Voss sat alone with a single candle and a map he had been studying for 40 years. He did not fold it. He traced one finger along the eastern border, past Renvale, past the neutral zones, past the places the new treaty named so carefully, until it rested on a territory the new treaty had not addressed, a small province, unremarkable on most maps, unremarkable to most people. But Voss knew something about that province that the new treaty's authors did not. He had known it for 11 years. He had been waiting, with the particular patience of a man who understood that the right moment was worth more than any number of premature ones, to the precise set of circumstances that would make that knowledge useful. Those circumstances had just arrived. He sat with his finger on that territory for a long time. Then he blew out the candle. Not tonight, he thought, but soon. And this time, she won't see it coming until it's already done. I had gone to the festival to dare myself back to life. I had not known I was walking straight toward the man who had been looking for me, and that loving him would cost us both something real and be worth every single piece of it.